Just another old man, pretending he still matters." The words weren't shouted. They dripped from Karen Thompson's lips like venom, low enough for plausible deniability, loud enough to slice into Michael Carter's chest like a blade. Picture this. A man who once faced gunfire and death without blinking now only wishes for a quiet afternoon by his backyard pool. A man who once faced gunfire and death without blinking now only wishes for a quiet afternoon by his backyard pool. Michael Carter, 79 years old, a decorated Marine Corps veteran, sat in a weathered lounge chair under the soft blaze of the late afternoon sun. The small pool behind his modest home glistened, the clean water rippling gently in the breeze, a mirror of the peace he had fought so long and hard to protect. Michael's skin, tanned and creased by time and battles long past, absorbed the warmth. His white t-shirt was crisp but worn, his khaki shorts neatly pressed. A faded cap, embroidered with the Marine Corps emblem, shaded his eyes. In one hand he nursed a tall glass of iced tea, condensation trailing down its side. This little patch of heaven, the house, the pool, the garden, was not just property. It was the sanctuary he had built after a lifetime of sacrifice. 2 tours in Vietnam, years of rebuilding his life stateside, endless overtime shifts. It wasn't much compared to the mansions that dotted the neighborhood, but to Michael, it was priceless. The breeze shifted. Michael caught a movement across the street. There, behind half-closed blinds, a pair of calculating eyes watched him. Karen Thompson, mid-40s. Platinum blonde hair curled into stiff, manufactured waves, wineglass perpetually glued to one hand, phone to the other. She was the kind who wore entitlement like perfume, and the air seemed heavier every time she stepped outside. Michael turned his gaze back to the water. He didn't need trouble. Not today. Not ever again. But peace, it seemed, was a privilege some people couldn't stand seeing in others. The rumble of tires snapped him out of his reverie. A patrol car crept up the street and pulled into his driveway. 2 officers stepped out, young, tense, hands resting too close to their belts. Michael remained seated, his heartbeat steady but heavy, old instincts stirring. One officer approached, squinting suspiciously. "We got a call," he said curtly, "about a suspicious individual. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Michael slowly set his tea down. He spoke with the calm clarity honed through decades of discipline. "I live here. This is my home." The younger cop glanced over his shoulder at Karen's house. Through the blinds, she stood smirking, her wine glass raised in mock salute. The officers mumbled something about routine checks before shuffling back to their car. No apology, no acknowledgement of the insult, just suspicion, lingering in their wake like a bad smell. Michael didn't move. He watched them drive away, his fists clenched silently on the arms of the chair. His shoulders, once proud under the weight of a soldier's burden, now slumped not from age, but from the invisible weight of being doubted. Again. Across the street, Karen disappeared into her house, victorious in her petty battle. Michael sat still for a long time, staring at the water. It was the first crack in the tranquility he had fought to build, and deep down he knew it wouldn't be the last. The next morning, before the sun could even burn the dew off the grass, the first crack widened. Michael Carter, still nursing the sting of yesterday's indignity, was kneeling by his rose garden, carefully trimming away a few browning leaves. His hands, though weathered and scarred from battles most had forgotten, moved with a surgeon's precision, a man tending to what little peace he had left. The squeak of a gate hinge cut through the stillness. Michael looked up, expecting perhaps a delivery driver or a neighbor waving good morning. Instead, there she was, Karen Thompson, dressed in a neon pink bikini that clashed violently with the soft morning light, oversized sunglasses perched arrogantly on her nose, and a beach towel slung over one shoulder like a general preparing to invade. Without so much as a glance at Michael, she strode across the lawn, his lawn trailing sandal prints on the freshly cut grass. She dropped her towel onto one of his lounge chairs with the air of a queen claiming her throne. Then, looking over the rim of her sunglasses, she smirked and said, loud enough for the world to hear, "So, are you the new pool boy? or just the neighborhood decoration? Michael rose slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. His jaw tightened. Every fiber of his disciplined soul told him to remain calm, measured the way he had once been trained to walk through minefields without flinching. "This is private property," he said, voice low but firm. "You need to leave." Karen tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. It's just a pool." Michael said nothing, only watched as she kicked off her sandals and dipped her toes into the water, rippling his sanctuary with her arrogance. Behind the mirrored lenses, Karen's eyes glinted with something colder than mockery ownership. She didn't see a man who had fought for her freedom. She saw an old obstacle in her playground. "You people are so touchy," she added, tossing her sunglasses onto a table as she waded waist, deep into the water. Michael's fists tightened at his sides, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He turned and walked back toward the house, his spine straight, his hands steady, the posture of a soldier retreating not in fear, but in contempt. Behind him, Karen's laughter floated on the breeze, sharp and shrill. At the kitchen window, Michael's reflection caught his own tired eyes. He had seen dictators fall, comrades die, entire nations rise and crumble. And yet here he was, an old man in his own yard, powerless against a woman who saw his dignity as nothing but an inconvenience. He took a long, steadying breath. Peace, he reminded himself, often demands patience. But patience, like everything else, had limits. And somewhere deep inside, something shifted. The battle for his home and his honor had just begun. 3 days later, the trespass became an invasion. It began with the pounding bass of cheap party music, reverberating off the walls of Michael Carter's modest home. Startled, Michael stepped out onto his patio, and his heart dropped. Strangers. Everywhere. His backyard, once a quiet haven, had been transformed into a scene of chaos. Teenagers splashing in his pool, red Solo cups littered across the lawn, cigarette butts ground into the flower beds his late wife had once tended with love. And in the center of it all, reclining like a queen among peasants, was Karen Thompson, cocktail in hand, laughing as if she owned the place. Michael's chest tightened. He walked slowly toward the poolside, each step heavy with disbelief. He could hear snippets of conversation as he approached. "Whose place is this anyway?" "Some old dude's. He never uses it." Karen said it's fine. "She practically runs this block." Karen spotted him and raised her glass mockingly. "Relax, Carter," she shouted over the music. "You should be thanking me. I'm giving your sad little pool a reason to exist." A younger man bumped into Michael, spilling beer onto his clean lawn without so much as an apology. Michael clenched his fists until his knuckles blanched white. This wasn't just trespassing. It wasn't even simple disrespect. It was erasure. The home he had built, the life he had earned, the dignity he carried wiped away in a sea of entitled laughter. He inhaled slowly, counting back from 10 the way his drill sergeant had taught him decades ago. Then he spoke, voice even but cutting. "This is your one warning. Leave my property, now." Karen laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. "Or what? You'll bore us with war stories." The crowd snickered. Michael turned, walked back into his house without another word, and closed the door gently behind him. But his mind was no longer calm. A storm had begun to brew. He called the local police department, voice measured and respectful. The dispatcher promised to send someone when available. An hour later, 2 bored-looking officers arrived, took one glance at the ongoing party, shrugged, and advised Michael to talk to his neighbor, to work it out. Michael stared at them in disbelief. He was a veteran who had once fought to uphold the law, and now the law wouldn't even defend his own home. That night, Michael sat alone by the darkened pool, the garden lights casting long shadows across the battered lawn. The sound of drunken laughter still echoed faintly across the street as Karen and her guests finally dispersed. In his lap, Michael held a worn photograph him in his uniform, standing stiff and proud beside his squad, years and lifetimes ago. Back then, he'd believed in things like honor, in respect, in a basic understanding of right and wrong. But now, staring at the ruin of his backyard. Michael understood. Sometimes, battles came not from across the ocean but from across the street. He rose stiffly, went into the house, and locked the door behind him. Tomorrow, he decided, would not be another day of waiting. Tomorrow, he would fight back not with fists or fury, but with the careful, relentless patience of a man who had once survived far worse. Karen Thompson had crossed the final line, and she was about to find out what it truly meant to underestimate a veteran. Michael Carter wasn't a man quick to anger. Years in the military had taught him the value of patience, of picking battles carefully. But standing in his battered backyard, staring at crushed rose bushes and the faint outline of beer stains on the concrete, he knew patience had run dry. He spent that night at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a pool of light over a yellow notepad. His pen moved steadily, methodically. Not wild, not angry. Tactical, just like the operations he'd once planned half a world away. Step 1. Gather undeniable evidence. The next morning, while the neighborhood still slept, Michael installed 3 small, high-definition cameras around his property. Discreet, waterproof. Every inch of his sanctuary would be documented now, every trespass, every vandalism, every smirk. Step 2. Secure witnesses. Michael made polite conversation with a few sympathetic neighbors, folks who had grumbled about Karen but never dared confront her. Quietly, he asked them to keep an eye out. Take photos. Record videos if anything happened. He didn't rant. He didn't accuse. He simply spoke with the quiet dignity that made people want to listen and, more importantly, to act. Step 3. Prepare the final strike. Michael knew Karen's weaknesses, her vanity, her obsession with appearances, her belief that consequences were for other people. And so, after careful research, he found it, a non-toxic, cosmetic, reactive dye. Harmless. Invisible until it interacted with the oils in high-end sunscreens and expensive body lotions, the kind Karen and her friends slathered on before posing by his pool like it was a resort. He ordered the dye discreetly. He even tested it in a corner of the yard, smiling grimly as the color shifted brilliantly under certain chemicals, staining the skin an unmistakable shade of green that would take days and expensive treatments to fade. Everything was set, but still, Michael waited for the right moment, the way a sniper waits for the perfect shot. He didn't have to wait long. A week later, a Saturday afternoon bloomed hot and humid. Michael watched from behind a slightly parted curtain as Karen strutted onto his property, dragging another entourage behind her. They laughed. They posed for selfies. They popped open cheap champagne and sprayed it over the pool deck like spoiled children. Michael slipped out the back door, unseen, and around the side of the house. He poured the reactive dye carefully into the pool's filtration system, a process he had tested 3 times to perfection. Then, without a word, he got into his truck, drove a block away, and parked in the shade of a large oak tree. From there, he had a perfect view of his yard. He waited. 15 minutes later, the first screams split the summer air. Michael watched calmly as panic spread like wildfire. Karen's shrieks were the loudest. Her arms, her legs, her face were turning a vivid, sickly green. Her expensive swimsuit stained. Her perfectly manicured guests fled, clutching towels, weeping, cursing the disgusting chemical reaction. Michael leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. There was no joy in it, no malice. Only justice. Justice for every time he'd been treated as less than human in his own home. Justice for every look of dismissal, every insult wrapped in fake smiles. The cameras recorded everything, the trespassing, the vandalism, the public humiliation. Michael Carter hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't thrown a punch. He had simply drawn a line and enforced it, with the precision and finality of a man who understood that respect, once trampled, must sometimes be reclaimed. Karen Thompson had finally been forced to see the truth. You don't trample over a veteran and walk away clean. The shrieking didn't stop when the guests left his yard. In fact, it got louder. Michael Carter, from the quiet of his truck, watched as Karen Thompson stumbled across the street, green-skinned and wild-eyed. Her friends trailed behind her, dripping, shrieking, their designer swimwear ruined, their hair streaked with ghastly color. The neighborhood began to stir. Curtains twitched, front doors cracked open, phones were raised, recording every embarrassing second. Karen's perfect image, so carefully curated through gossip and manipulation, was unraveling in real time. Karen tried to shout over the chaos. "Someone put something in the pool, I'm calling the cops." Her voice cracked in desperation. "Good," Michael thought grimly. "Let them come." 20 minutes later, another patrol car rolled up. The same young officers, from before the ones who had shrugged off his complaints now, stared in stunned confusion at the bizarre spectacle before them. Karen lunged at them first, pointing frantically toward Michael's house. "He did this. He's crazy. He sabotaged my party." Michael stepped out of his truck and walked slowly toward the gathering crowd. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held up a slim flash drive between two fingers. "Officers," he said, voice steady, "I have footage from my security cameras. It shows Ms. Thompson and her guests trespassing without permission, damaging private property, and using my pool without consent." The younger cop shifted uncomfortably. Karen's face twisted, a dozen excuses racing through her mind but dying on her lips. Michael continued, calm and relentless. "There are also recordings from last week's incident and the week before that. If needed, I'll be forwarding all copies to my lawyer and the local homeowners association." Karen turned a furious shade of red, no small feat considering the green dye that still stained her skin. The officer held out his hand for the flash drive. "We'll, need to review the evidence. And while you're at it," Michael added dryly, "you might want to ask Ms. Thompson why she called the police last week to report a suspicious individual sitting in his own backyard." The officer flinched. The realization hit him visibly. They hadn't just mishandled a neighbor dispute. They had dismissed a decorated veteran protecting his own property. Karen sputtered incoherently. "This is harassment. This is a setup." Michael said nothing. He didn't have to. The truth was now laid bare, undeniable, ugly as the green stains that smeared across Karen's legs and arms. The officers politely but firmly advised Karen to leave the property and expect a formal notice regarding trespassing charges. For once, Karen had no snarky comeback. Only silent retreat, her shoulders hunched, her entitlement collapsing under the weight of public humiliation. As she staggered back toward her house, a few neighbors clapped quietly from their porches. Not mockery. Support. For Michael. Later that evening, Michael sat once more by his pool. The water shimmered under the soft glow of garden lights, peaceful again, untouched. He sipped a cold beer slowly, savoring the stillness. Across the street, Karen's windows were dark. A for sale sign already leaned crookedly in her yard, hastily hammered into the grass like a surrender flag. Michael allowed himself a rare smile. Respect, he thought, isn't demanded. It's earned. And sometimes, it's defended one boundary, one quiet stand, one small but unforgettable lesson at a time. The days that followed were quiet. Unnaturally quiet, the kind of stillness that only settles after a storm has spent itself. Michael Carter spent the first morning repairing the damage. He raked up the cigarette butts, patched the trampled lawn, and righted the patio furniture Karen's guests had left strewn like wreckage. His movements were slow but steady, the methodical grace of a man used to restoring order where chaos once reigned. Neighbors stopped by, offering cautious greetings they hadn't dared before. An older couple from 2 houses down brought him fresh lemonade. A teenage boy, skateboard tucked under one arm, awkwardly apologized for laughing at Karen's parties. Michael accepted each gesture with a quiet nod. He didn't need their words. He had already won something far greater than a simple apology. He had reclaimed his home, his peace, and, most importantly, his dignity. Across the street, Karen Thompson's house sat hollow and defeated. The "for sale" sign now gleamed proudly, catching the afternoon light like a banner of surrender. Rumors swirled through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. Karen's humiliation had gone viral. The videos, her green-streaked face, her shrieks, her furious accusations had flooded local social media, sparking a wave of memes, parodies, and brutal commentary. Realtors quietly spread the word. Difficult neighbor history. Prospective buyers asked too many questions. Offers fell through. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the block, became its greatest cautionary tale. Michael didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Real justice, he knew, wasn't about spectacle. It was about restoring balance. 1 week later, the moving trucks arrived. Karen didn't throw a farewell party. No neighbors gathered to wish her well. She climbed into the passenger seat of a battered SUV, avoiding every pair of watching eyes, and drove away without a backward glance. Michael watched from his front porch, a mug of black coffee in his hand, the old Marine Corps emblem glinting on his hat. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply stood, silent and immovable, like a sentry seeing a threat escorted off the battlefield. With Karen gone, the neighborhood seemed to breathe easier. Children's laughter returned to the sidewalks. Porch lights twinkled late into the evening. People greeted each other by name again, as if a great invisible weight had lifted. And Michael? He reclaimed his afternoons by the pool. Sometimes he would sit with a paperback, letting the soft ripple of the water soothe him. Sometimes he would work the garden, the sweet scent of new blossoms washing away the last bitter traces of the past few months. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and bathed everything in gold, a moving van pulled up across the street. A young couple stepped out nervous, smiling, full of hope. They waved shyly at Michael. He tipped his cap in return, a simple, silent welcome. A few days later, they brought over a plate of homemade cookies. Their little girl, no older than 5, stared wide-eyed at Michael's old military ribbons, displayed in the den, and whispered, "Were you a hero?" Michael chuckled softly. "No, sweetheart," he said, patting her head gently. "Just a man who tried to do the right thing." The little girl beamed, as if she'd just met a legend. As the seasons shifted and the cicadas sang again in the summer trees, Michael's home and his heart finally settled into true peace. The lesson remained, etched into the very air of the street. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. And never, ever underestimate a veteran, especially when he's defending something he loves. It started small, almost invisible at first. A friendly wave here. An offer to help carry groceries there. Children playing tag down. Sidewalks that had once echoed only with whispered gossip and wary glances. Without Karen Thompson's heavy presence pressing on the block, the neighborhood began to heal itself, slowly, like a forest regrowing after a wildfire. And at the heart of that change stood Michael Carter. He hadn't campaigned for it. He hadn't demanded respect. He had simply endured, and in enduring, reminded people what quiet strength really looked like. It was Mrs. Anderson from 2 doors down who first proposed it. A community day, she called it. A simple afternoon gathering by Michael's pool with permission this time to celebrate the neighborhood's new chapter. Michael chuckled when they asked him. He wasn't a man for big gestures. But seeing the hopeful faces of neighbors' faces once closed off, now open and sincere, he agreed. The day of the event dawned bright and clear. Tables popped up along the sidewalks, laden with homemade pies and pitchers of lemonade. Kids darted in and out of sprinkler arcs, shrieking with laughter. Old veterans from the local VFW post even showed up, trading stories and slaps on the back. At the center of it all, the pool sparkled, cleaned, restored, and untouched by trespassing feet. Michael sat under a large umbrella, his Marine Corps cap tipped low over his eyes, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. People approached him one by one, some offering thanks, others shy apologies for not having spoken up sooner. Michael accepted each word with the same steady humility. He didn't need fanfare. Respect, he knew, wasn't about ceremonies or speeches. It lived in the everyday choices people made: the choice to greet a neighbor, to defend the quiet man when no one else would, to remember that dignity mattered even when it was easy to overlook. Later in the afternoon, a local news crew showed up. Word had spread about the Green Pool Party debacle and the neighborhood's turnaround. A young reporter approached Michael, microphone in hand, eager for a quote. "Mr. Carter," she said, smiling brightly, "how does it feel to have your community rally around you after everything?" Michael looked out across the yard at the laughing children, the neighbors sharing stories, the flags fluttering gently on front porches. He thought for a moment, then said quietly, "It's not about me. It's about what happens when people choose to be better neighbors and better human beings." The reporter blinked, almost caught off guard by the simple power of his words. The segment aired that night. Michael didn't watch it. He was back in his den, sipping a quiet cup of coffee, the evening breeze carrying the faint smell of fresh-cut grass and barbecue. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need to be called a hero. He had his peace back. And sometimes, that was the greatest victory of all. Summer faded gently into autumn. The leaves along the quiet street turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, swirling through the air like confetti. For the first time in years, Michael Carter welcomed the change of seasons, not with resignation, but with a deep, steady contentment. His home, once a silent fortress against hostility, had become a place of laughter and life again. Children often waved when they saw him trimming his hedges. Neighbors stopped to chat about everything and nothing. And sometimes, as the sun set low and the porch lights flickered on one by one, Michael would sit on his front step and listen to the peaceful hum of a community rebuilt not by grand gestures, but by quiet choices made better each day. One crisp Saturday morning, a small package arrived at his door. No return address, just a simple, neatly wrapped box with a handwritten note tucked inside. Michael opened it carefully. Inside was a medal tarnished with age, but unmistakable, a Purple Heart. The note, written in a firm but slightly trembling hand, read, "For the battles you fought abroad and the ones you fought at home, with even more courage. From a grateful neighbor you never knew you inspired." Michael stared at the medal for a long moment. Memories flooded back. Faces, battles, long marches under foreign skies. He hadn't thought of himself as a hero in a long time. He still didn't. But the gesture touched something deep, a quiet affirmation that even unseen battles mattered. Later that afternoon, he mounted the medal in a simple frame and hung it on the wall beside his old military photos. Not to boast, not to remind anyone else, but to remind himself, respect, like peace, is earned every day, and sometimes it must be defended when no one else will. As the weeks passed, a new family moved into Karen Thompson's old house. They were younger, a little rough around the edges, but warm and respectful. Their little boy, no older than 5, wandered over one day while Michael was tending the garden. "Hi," the boy said shyly. "Mom says you're a real soldier." Michael smiled beneath his cap. "Was," he said, "a long time ago. She says you're the reason everyone's nice now," the boy added, kicking a pebble shyly. Michael knelt, meeting the child's bright, innocent eyes. "No, son," he said gently. "Everyone had that kindness in them all along. Sometimes it just needs a little reminder." The boy grinned, wide and toothy, and scampered off to chase falling leaves. Michael rose, dusted off his knees, and turned back toward his house, a house filled now not just with memories of what had been, but with hope for what could still be. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the sky blushed pink and gold, Michael Carter sat once more by his restored pool. The water rippled softly, catching the light, a mirror to the life he had reclaimed. Not by shouting, not by fighting fire with fire, but by standing firm, by remembering who he was, by teaching in the oldest, most powerful way possible that dignity was not a thing to be handed out or taken away. It lived inside those who refused to be broken by the world's small cruelties. It lived inside men like him. And for the first time in a long time, Michael allowed himself a rare, private smile. Full circle. Home again.